Well, what we're doing now is we're going to start doing some hand building, and so I want to show you how to roll out some clay. To begin with, I think I should explain to you a couple of things that are necessary in order to begin, and that is right here we have a board. We stretch cloth over the board, and you can stretch all different types of cloths, but I would use a natural fiber primarily because the natural fibers absorb moisture. And one of the things that you want to do when you start rolling out your clay is to keep it from sticking to whatever you're rolling out the clay onto. Now, if I were to roll the clay onto this bare table, the clay would stick to the table. Then we'd have the problem of how do we get the clay off the table. If you don't have cloth, you can use things like paper, newsprint or butcher paper, things of this sort. And right here we have two sticks, and these sticks are both cut the same way, and they're 3/8 of an inch. And the reason we do this is when I start rolling out the clay, I'm going to roll the clay in between the two sticks as much as I can, and that way you keep an evenness of your clay body so that you don't have one that's 1/4 of an inch, one that's 3/8, and one that's 5/8, this sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of clay, and I don't think I'm going to need all of it, so I'm going to start out by patting it down. Then I want to pick it up off the board with the cloth on it. The reason I do that is every time that you press the clay onto the board, it'll stretch out to a certain distance. Then it won't want to stretch anymore because it's going to be hanging on to the cloth. So what you do is you pick it up a little bit, and that way you've loosened it up and it's ready to be rolled again. So what you do is just start rolling with your rolling pin. I recommend that you try to roll fairly fast because this rolling pin does not have any cloth on it. And just as dough will stick to a rolling pin if you don't use flour, the clay will stick to the rolling pin too. Okay, I'm going to loosen it up a little bit again. I want to move it out a little bit more, and as you can see now it wants to move more because I've loosened it up. Okay, simple. Now what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you what's called a drape mold. This is a piece of plaster. What we did to make this mold was simply take some clay and form a concave form in a piece of clay, and then pour the plaster inside of it. And then you have this form made. So what we're going to do now is do exactly what the name tells us that we are going to do. We're going to drape this clay over the mold. Okay. Now we're going to have more than enough clay here, so what I'm going to do is just lay it down, try to get any wrinkles or crinkles out of it, which is pretty easy to do because the clay is still so plastic. Okay, so now we have this draped over the mold, and now I'm going to simply cut around the mold with my needle. And I take this clay away, and we can wedge this clay up and use it for something else later. Now, as you know, wedging gets rid of the air bubbles, and so we want to wedge it enough to do that. And we'll use this clay again later. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this board and I'm going to set it down, and I'm going to bring over some more clay and show you how to put clay in a concave mold rather than a positive mold like we just had there. Okay. This one was formed by taking a box, and you can take a regular cardboard box if you want to, wash the inside of it with Vaseline or soap, make sure that there's no holes in the box, and then you lay a big lump of clay in the box, then you pour the plaster on top of it, then you tear off your cardboard box and you've got your mold all ready. And we'll do that later for you so you can really see how it's done. Okay, here's another piece of clay that's been rolled out, and we're going to do a very similar thing. So we're going to be putting it into the concave form rather than the convex form, over a convex form. And again, I'm going to trim this off the edge here. Now, when I do this, I want to caution you, whenever you're using a plaster mold, you should always have a very light touch with your needle or use a wooden tool. Otherwise, you can cut and make little chips of plaster that will get into your clay. That's very, very detrimental. You'll have problems if you get plaster in your clay body, because it'll stay right in the clay body, and when you are firing it later on, even after the glaze form, the plaster will absorb moisture, expand, and then break the pot. So that's one. Now I'm going to do it to a second one, and you'll get to see that done twice very quickly. Okay, again, now I'm going to trim my clay away from the side. Okay, now the reason I'm making two forms like this, and they're both almost approximately exactly the same size, is because I'm going to take the two of them, put them together, and make a one form pot out of it. So we're going to set these aside. And let them stiffen up for a while because they're too soft to work with at this point. And I'm going to get some more molds and show you how to put some slab into a square form to make a square pot. Rolling out another piece of clay now because I'm going to show you another method of forming a pot form. This can also be used in sculpture. And we're going to be working with a square form concept so that it'll be a box form rather than a rounded pot form that you may be a little more familiar with. Okay. Okay, after you get your clay rolled out, you're going to take a right angle here and lay it down on my clay. And I've decided to work with 15 inches by 9 inches, so it's going to be a rectangular form. Okay, we take our excess and again toss it so we'll be able to use it later. Okay, now I'm going to take this clay over here and set it in this mold that's built on a 45-degree angle. Now, what I want to do now is I want to take my wooden tool. You can use a fork, you can use a needle. Just score this down this edge right here. And now I'm going to grab another piece of clay. And we're going to cut it the same way as we cut the first. this type of method, you can get a much larger form created too. You can go a lot further than what I did right here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some slip down here where I scored it. And if you notice, I have a piece of paper inside this plywood mold. And the piece of paper has a very definite purpose. Now I'm scoring the edge of this, which is going to be the side that meets the side inside that I just scored and put slip on. But the paper in the mold works as a release, so that when I put the form inside, it won't stick to the plywood mold. And when I want to pick it out, I can actually grab hold of the paper, and the paper will help me pick it out of the mold when I'm finished. Okay, now I'm going to kind of gush it around here until it kind of starts setting in. Then I'm going to press that area together. And I'm still not finished. Now I'm going to show you how to roll a coil and put a coil inside that corner to help give it added strength. So start off with a piece of clay again. Okay, I'm just going to wedge up some clay here because I'm going to make it into a coil. And I'm going to use one of my boards again because it's got the cloth on it, and it helps keep things from sticking, so I like to use that all the time as much as I can. Now I'm going to get this going in kind of a big coil-like form. And one of the tricks of learning how to roll coil is that whenever you start rolling your coil, it's going to get a flat edge, and it'll start going blip plop, up and down. I'll show you what I mean right now by I'll force it in that direction. So it goes up and down because it's higher on one side than the other. So what you do is you turn it up on its high side and you just pat it down like this, and then you have it going more in a real coil form, and then you can start working from that point on. And you'll have to do it a few times too in order to get the thing to work the way you want it. Now, another thing I do is I roll my coils from this part of my hand, right from the base of my palm, right up to the tips of my fingers. And as you notice, I keep my fingers wide apart, so I'm able to control more of the clay at one time, rather than having them closed like this. Okay, now I'm not going to need all this, so I'll pull off a piece of it and continue rolling this out. This looks easy, and yet when you try to roll coil for the first time, it can be very hard to do. Okay, now I'm going to lay this down inside the form. Now I'm going to take the butt of my wooden tool, this point right here, not the pointed part but the other side, and I'm going to press the clay down into the other clay. And this helps to build a more secure edge. Gives it added strength. And after I get in that far, then I can take my fingers and actually mold it. And as you see, it's going to just disappear into the sides of the form because it's going to become one. Okay, folks. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a separate one just like this one. So I'm going to end up with 4 sides instead of just these 2. After I get that done, then I'll come back to you and roll out a 5th slab, which will be the base, the bottom of the form. All right. Now, one of the things that I've done is I rolled out another coil and I looped it. Let me show you how. I'll just turn this up. And you can see how I've turned the loop right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it here, cut it here, get rid of this. Do the same thing on this side. Now I'm going to get my fork. I'm going to lay these on here. Now the reason that I formed these earlier and made them into a loop earlier is if I had waited longer, just laid it out straight and then looped it when I was ready to put it on, the loop would tend to get more cracks in it and have a good chance of losing the coil altogether. Okay, now I'm going to lay these on here, and I'm actually going to trim them down some more because now I'm right here with the pot and can see exactly how much clay I want to have. Now this is going to turn into the foot for the pot. It's going to be able to sit on this. Okay, so now I'm going to score it. Same thing here. Take some slip, plop it on here. Set that on there. Same thing over here. Okay, now you notice I have a break between the two. The reason I want to keep a break in there, and you don't always have to do it, but one of the things that it does do is it aids you in that when the clay starts to shrink and the pot starts to shrink and it's setting on a table or whatever you have it setting on, it has less chance of cracking during the drying process. Okay, now I'm going to take this tool again and I'm going to use the butt of it again and I'm going to push it right down into the clay all the way around. And do it on the inside too. because one of the things I want to do is I want to not use it just as a design, but I also want to keep it and make it adhere to the pot. So I go all the way around, inside and out. As you remember, I'll pick up some of that slip. As you remember, I put this on a plaster mold. One of the great things about plaster molds is that it absorbs the moisture right out of the clay. And in that process, works as its own release. So when we want to turn this over and take the pot off of the plaster mold, the plaster will generally want to come out on its own, and it does today too. Okay, once we get this far, then what I like to do is, depending on how stiff it is, I like to try to get a little more of a design involved in it. So what I can do is I can take other pieces of clay, and these are just pieces of clay that I trimmed off some of my slab earlier. One of the things I like about working with hand building is you can get going in a very organic direction. And I'm using the same basic method of adhering this to the pot. I use my fingers as I did with the foot, because I'm going to try to keep that mentality through this form, at least this one. Okay, so get another piece here. And I can come across with it over here, paddle it in a little bit with a stick, and then again come back with my sculpturing tool and help adhere this to the pot. And at the same time, I can use this to become portion of a handle so that you could grip it over here if you like. Now I'm not going to spend a whole time finishing this off, so we'll come back to it later after I do some more work to it and show you what it looks like as a finished state. Hi there. What I've done now is because I decided I wanted to build up the edges more, I put it back on its original plaster mold, and now I'm adding pieces all the way around here and extending it up in order to give it a different kind of a finished lip area. And after these new pieces set up somewhat, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it back over, and then I'll clean out the interior, because when you add pieces here there'll be overlaps underneath that'll have to be cleaned up a little later. So right now I'm going to take this, set aside. One more thing I wanted to note to you, I put a little plastic container under it in order to get it off the ground so that these new lips can hang down. So the mold is in here, plastic container is holding that, and after it gets a little stiff then we'll flip it over and clean out the inside and we'll be finished. Okay.